On today's episode of Locked On Wild, we discuss the most notable free agent acquisition for the Minnesota Wild this season, Yakov Trenin, and where he fits into the roster for 2024-2025.
You're Locked On Wild, your daily podcast on the Minnesota Wild, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's happening, everybody? Welcome into another episode of Locked On Wild. We are your daily Minnesota Wild podcast, and we are your team each and every day. We thank you for making Locked On Wild your first listen each and every day. Make sure you subscribe on YouTube and your favorite podcast platform so you don't miss out on any new episodes throughout the week. Today's episode of Locked On Wild is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. On today's episode of Locked On Wild, we hit the season preview for Yakov Trenin, the most notable acquisition for the Minnesota Wild in free agency. We'll talk about why what he brings will be well beyond standard goals and points, and why having somebody who plays with a ruthless aggression is something that the Wild do actually need. My name is Seth Toupal, credentialed Wild media member and host of Locked On Wild since 2021, and continuing with our player previews here for the 2024-2025 season. Just want to mention we've got a double feature for you tomorrow. Isha Jerome and I of the Soda Pod are going to be taking a look at each of the four divisions throughout the NHL leading up to the first week of the season. So we'll be talking about the Pacific Division to start it off tomorrow. And Joe Smith of The Athletic going to join the show. We'll talk about the potential for a 3-goalie rotation, why that likely won't work. And we'll also take a look at other key questions ahead of the season. If you have any questions you'd like me to ask Joe, leave those in the comments for today's episode, and we'll get them on with him for tomorrow. So let's talk about the most notable acquisition for the Minnesota Wild, who, again, didn't have a ton in the way of money to play with to be able to add impact pieces. And so they add an identity piece in Yakov Trenin, who signs for 4 years at $3.5 million per season. And this one was interesting to me because the first thing that jumps off the page is that Trenin was a player who was on the roster when John Hynes was the head coach of the Nashville Predators. And so we get a John Hynes guy in Yakov Trenin, but Trenin is somebody who is coming in providing two areas that are important in need of upgrades that have nothing to do with offense, because this is something that has been said. Once the Minnesota Wild lost out by trading the likes of Pat Maroon and Brandon Duhaime, they turned into a soft team down the stretch in the way that they just were physically outmaneuvered quite a bit. They turned into one of the smallest rosters in the NHL. And look, I know speed and skill is the prevailing characteristic of many teams in the NHL today. But even to just get through the regular season, the Wilds, by having Marcus Foligno have surgery, by having Pat Maroon, by having Brandon Duhaime both traded, like, they just didn't have anybody that had oomph in the lineup. And I'm not talking necessarily about oomph in terms of being able to occasionally levy hits. I'm talking about like full-fledged pit bull bulldogs that are not fun to play against because they bring an intensity on the ice that is tough to go up against. And everything that I've heard about Yakov Trenin coming here to Minnesota is that he brings an intensity with his physical play on the ice that is something that other teams don't enjoy. And Bill Guerin said in the offseason as much that the Wild needed to add a little more to their identity. And he's not wrong because, again, as I laid out, it was just a Wild team down the stretch that was pretty easy to push around. And if you don't have an overabundance of speed and skill, you've got to be able to just push back against the teams that you're playing. And all these other teams had just so much size in front of the Wild in the division that they just weren't able to match up really at all. And so they bring in Yakov Trenin, who started the season with Nashville, ended up going to the Colorado Avalanche to finish out the season and played a little bit in the postseason as well. All told, Trenin played in 76 games. He had 12 goals, 5 assists, had 17 total points. He was a plus 15, 40 penalty minutes in those 76 games. Really didn't contribute at all on the power play, as we'll talk about with Roll later on in the show. Only one of his points was other than even strength. He had one shorthanded assist on the season because he, turns out, plays a lot of penalty kill. 116 total shots this season, shot 10.3%. Now, the big numbers to get to, he was 45% in the faceoff circle, 99 faceoff wins, 121 faceoff losses. Didn't take a ton of attempts. Took way more with Nashville or with Colorado than he did with Nashville. In fact, he only had 50 total faceoffs in 60 games for the Nashville Predators. But then he had 77 faceoff wins and 93 faceoff losses for the Avs, a 45.3% faceoff winning percentage. He had 36 total blocks. Here's the big number: 207 hits. 207 hits, 170 of them with Nashville in 60 games, and then 37 in 16 games for the Colorado Avalanche. In the postseason, his numbers, he had 1 goal in 10 games, had 30 hits in 10 games, and was a 43.6% face-off winner in the circle for the Avs. Now, where do some of those numbers rank had Trenin been on the team the whole season? Well, the 116 shots would put him behind Jonas Brodin, who had 117 in 62 games. It would put him just ahead of Marcus Johansson for 9th on the team with 116 shots. Now, where do the 207 hits rank? That would be first by a mile. Marcus Foligno would have been second then with 179. Joel Eriksson Ek had 169, and Brandon Duhaime had 155. 207 would have led the way by a long shot for this Minnesota Wild team. And I know hits are more of an indicator of activity than actual success on the ice. But from what I've heard from Ann Kimmel of Locked On Predators and what I heard from Chris and Kyle of Locked On Avalanche, Trenin is a warrior out there. He's a fierce presence. And this kind of leads us to this overarching theme for Trenin's arrival, pointing to other problems on this roster, because you look at the type of player that Trenin is. He's a pretty consistent 10-goal scorer. The last 3 seasons, he's scored at least 10 goals. He's played in at least the last 3 seasons, he scored at least 12 goals. He's played in at least 76 games. And he's between a 17 to 24 point player. His hits have gone from 167 at the lowest to 207 at the highest. He also had 191 when he was 25 years old for the Predators. Sounds an awful lot like Marcus Foligno, does it not? And Trenin is 6'2", 201, so he's a little lighter than Foligno, but Trenin is basically the same sort of player. A ton of hits, between 10 goals and 20 points in that general vicinity, and somebody that helps you on defense and penalty kill more than they do on offense. And so this leads us to this overall point that has kind of marked Bill Guerin's tenure with the Wild as his GM, is that we have more of those types of players right now than guys that are capable of producing in the top six, which I think is a reason that the results are the way that they have been over the last couple of seasons, especially. The offense has tailed off, and as a result, it's been harder for the team to compete against the top teams in the Central unless they get the elite goaltending. And so I don't doubt that Trenin is going to come in and is going to play well, because he has a pedigree of doing that in this league. But as far as filling a hole, it's more so he is coming in to do a better job of the thing that a few other guys are supposed to be doing as it is right now. And so my initial reaction when Trenin was signed was, we already have a few of those guys. And so, again, I don't doubt, because Trenin has a resume, a reputation of being that type of a player, but you already have a few of those guys on this roster. And so as a result, where he fits in the lineup is kind of an interesting question, which we will dive into a little bit more as we continue today's episode of Locked On Wild after this. Today's episode of Locked On Wild is brought to you by Game Time. Folks, the NFL season is kicking off. Major League Baseball is reaching the push to the playoffs. College football is back, which means that there are no shortage of opportunities for you to go enjoy watching your favorite teams at some of the best stadiums around the country. And Game Time is here to help make the ticket buying experience as stress-free as possible. More time for you to tailgate and celebrate watching your favorite team score touchdowns, and less time worrying about seat prices, waiting for the perfect seats to pop up. Game Time can help you with all of that. Plus, Game Time has a new feature called Game Time Picks that makes getting tickets for your favorite live events even easier. Game Time Picks filters out the fluff to show you only incredible deals on great seats, so you don't have to waste time searching through thousands of tickets. Take into account their seat views, which offer you a look at where you'll be sitting before you even buy your seat, and their lowest price guarantee. If you find tickets that are cheaper, Game Time will credit you 110% of the difference. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off. Download Game Time today. What time is it? It's game time. Welcome back to today's episode of Locked On Wild. Once again, we thank you for making Locked On Wild your first listen each and every day. We are your team each and every day. Reminder, the Locked On Wild sweepstakes continues, and all you have to do to enter for your chance to win 2 tickets to see the Minnesota Wild take on the Columbus Blue Jackets on opening night is take a screenshot of proof that you are subscribed to Locked On Wild on YouTube, and send that with your name to lockedonwild@gmail.com. Once you do that, you're entered in, and you'll join the other entries for your chance to win. We'll draw the winner in early October to give you enough opportunity to get everything situated for the game. Again, your chance to win 2 tickets to see the Minnesota Wild take on Columbus on opening night. All you got to do, screenshot proof that you subscribe via YouTube to Locked On Wild, and send us your name as well to lockedonwild@gmail.com. And you're in. It's as easy as that, as we try to get Locked On Wild to 3,000 YouTube subscribers by opening day. Let's get back to the conversation regarding Yakov Trenin, because I do have a couple of points that I want to bring up that I would like to see avoided by the Minnesota Wilds with Trenin that we saw with Pat Maroon. Everybody remember when Pat Maroon's tenure started with the Minnesota Wild, they suffered through a slew of injuries that led to Maroon playing sometimes as high as second line minutes for this Minnesota Wild team. I think if we keep Yakov Trenin where he is going to be most successful, which is a bottom six role, I think that would be of great value to this Minnesota Wild team. I don't think it's going to be as easy to take a player like Trenin and try to fill him into second line spot. Now, third line, yeah, you're probably okay bumping him up a little bit in the lineup there. But it was always kind of an odd fit to have Pat Maroon sliding in to play second line minutes. And it was initially effective, at least some of the underlying numbers. But after a while, it didn't work either. And so we are now in a position where you have what is expected to be multiple young players making this team. Liam Ogren, Marat Huznadinov are two that are likely expected to make this Minnesota Wild roster. And so let's put the parameters up that a player like Yakov Trenin is most effective when he is in a bottom six role. Now, I went back and looked some of his other numbers for last season. Let's look at the Corsi numbers. His Corsi for the season was 47.3. And so, again, what that means is that when Trenin was on the ice, opposing teams tended to possess the puck more. But because of the type of player that he is and the role that he plays, you kind of expect that, because he is he's a penalty kill guy. He doesn't play a ton of power play, plays lower in the lineup. And so depending on matchups, you're likely seeing higher lines against that line. And so the Corsi numbers don't bother me a ton. But some of these other numbers are the ones that we need to be keeping an eye on. In all situations this past season, Trenin's on ice goals for was at 2.3. So 2.3 goals per 60 minutes it's not what you'd like to see offensively. But what do we know about Trenin? Offense is not his strong suit. Defense and physicality is. The on-ice goals against, 2.3 per 60 minutes with Trenin on the ice. That's a pretty good defensive number. And the numbers got even better when he got to Colorado. I know it was a smaller sample size, but Trenin had a 1.5 on-ice goals against per 60 minutes when he got to Colorado. To be fair, smaller sample size, and as we'll look at, he was playing for sure a fourth-line role with the Avalanche. I think he was playing a little higher in the lineup with the Predators. I can't confirm that, because what Money Puck does is they just take a player's entire season and they just put it with the last team that they were on. So I don't have the Nashville data in front of me. I just have the entire season data for Colorado Avalanche, Yakov Trenin. Some of the other numbers, point shares for the entire season. Trenin was worth 1.4 point shares, negative 0.3 on offense, 1.7 on defense. And so if we look at the point shares, which again is the number of points that a player directly contributed to the overall team total, point shares 1.7 would have put Trenin just behind John Merrill somehow, and just ahead of Dakota Mermis for 15th on the team. Now, some of the other fourth line guys, Connor Dewar was worth 1.1 last season before he was traded. Brandon Duhaime was worth negative 0.2. Freddie Gaudreau was worth negative 0.4. And a lot of the guys that were playing fourth line roles for this Minnesota Wild team were in negative territory this past season. So you're not expecting those guys to contribute a ton in the way of points because they're back of the roster guys that offer depth and, more defense and physicality. Pat Maroon, for what it's worth, in 49 games last year was worth 0.5 points for his play. I mean, shoot, even Alex Goligoski was worth 0.8 in the 36 games that he played. So those guys, you just don't expect a lot from them for the season. The line that Trenin most commonly played with Colorado was with Andrew Cogliano and Brandon Duhaime. And that combination played a total of just under 40 minutes together. And they were responsible for 2.72 goals, expected goals for per 60 minutes. Again, not super high, but an expected goals against of 2.87 per 60 minutes, which is not too bad for a fourth line when you are the Colorado Avalanche. And so as far as best role for Trenin goes, I think it starts and ends with the fourth line and the penalty kill. Trenin on the penalty kill, he played 1 minute, 47 seconds per game shorthanded with the Nashville Predators. His goals against per 60 was one of the lowest on the team for regular penalty killers. The only forwards that got more penalty kill time for the Predators than Yakov Trenin per game was Cole Smith, Colton Sissons, and Ryan O'Reilly. So Trenin was one of their top four primary forwards on the penalty kill when he was there. When he was in Colorado, he averaged 2 minutes, 10 seconds per night on the penalty kill for the Avs. And again, his goals against per 60 was one of the lowest amongst the regular penalty killers for the Avs. He was only behind Logan O'Connor and Andrew Cogliano for penalty kill time with the Avs down the stretch. And let's keep this in mind as well. We talked about the face-off numbers, how Trenin didn't play a ton of center with the Predators. Colorado moved him to fourth-line center and said, here, this is yours, all the way down the stretch and into the postseason. So he's got some versatility to him as well. But those penalty kill numbers and goals against per 60, you look at a 5.2, and normally that wouldn't be great. But let's consider this too. When you're on the penalty kill, the opposing offense has the man advantage, and they're trying to score every time they have the puck. Cale Makar's goals against per 60 on the penalty kill by comparison was 8.3. Andrew Cogliano, 8.9. And so Trenin's numbers on the penalty kill are pretty good. But again, like we talked about, feels like you got a couple of other guys that play similar spots. And so this is not necessarily about Trenin, but more so about the other guys that were there first that are supposed to be doing the exact same thing. And so let's talk about expectations for what Yakov Trenin brings to the table and what we expect from an over-under perspective for Trenin this year. That is all on the way as we finish today's episode of Locked On Wilds after this. Final segment of today's episode of Locked On Wild. Once again, we thank you for making Locked On Wild your first listen each and every day. For your second listen today, make sure to check out the Locked On NHL podcast, keeping you up to date on all of the latest news throughout the National Hockey League with our panel of hosts throughout the week, whether it be at large NHL coverage Monday and Friday, Western Conference Tuesday with yours truly. Eastern Conference Wednesday or Power Rankings Thursday. We've got you covered all week long in the lead up to the start of the regular season. So make sure to check out Locked On NHL, your team every day. Reminder, too, Joe Smith joining us tomorrow from The Athletic. If you have any questions you'd like me to throw at Joe while we're recording, leave them in the comments here tonight, and we'll get to them in the morning, as many as we can fit in. So, where does Trenin fit? We talked about that a little bit. I just want to kind of circle back to what is most likely to happen, because Daily Faceoff has, as of right now, Jacob Lauko, Freddie Gaudreau, and Yakov Trenin as the fourth line. And this is probably what we're likely to see, because Freddie, while he doesn't have much, he has been a good faceoff guy throughout the last few seasons. And so I think of those two, he probably will be the center of that line, at least right now. Does it stay that way? I guess we'll wait and see. But I do think that's pretty likely for the fourth line. Now, the wild card, and we'll talk about him, we'll give him his own episode. The wild card is Lauko, because he does have a two-way contract, and so he technically could be sent to Iowa. I don't think he would be very happy with that, but he could either be the 13th forward or get sent to Iowa. Those are options on the table. But I think Trenin and Gaudreau, at least unless there's a trade made between now and the start of the season, I think that's likely to be part of the fourth line for this Minnesota Wild team. And so what do we look at for expectations for Yakov Trenin for this upcoming season? Well, the easiest way to put this is for him to just come in and do what he was brought here to do, which is to hit everything that moves and to help this team on the penalty kill. And I have been a strong proponent of seeing some different combinations for this Wild penalty kill throughout the season to keep things from getting predictable and from getting stale, so that you don't have a penalty kill that's third worst in the entire NHL for pretty much the entirety of the season. They spent most of the season with it being the worst by far. Just consistently of the belief that let's here and let's try some things out. And if Yakov Trenin is a penalty kill ace, let's make sure we give him requisite opportunities as well. But guys that play more of a fourth line role, they don't have as much opportunity to try to impact the game, because by and large, they're a little bit of a change of pace type line. But let's do this as well. Trenin is every bit as physical as Marcus Foligno with better durability. So maybe the thing that we look for most is that Trenin can come in and take some of the physical pressure off of Marcus Foligno, so that Foligno has a better chance of making it through more of the season. That would be, I think, the area where Trenin can help most. But even just looking at some of the numbers for the guys on this Minnesota Wild team last year that played fourth line, they were just abysmal. Like, I'm going to read out to you some of the numbers by players that played on the fourth line for this Minnesota Wild team last year. So let's start with, for instance, Vinny Lettieri. Primarily played fourth line. He did elevate to third a little bit. He had 9 total points in 46 games. Brandon Duhaime had 8 points in 62 games before he was traded. Jake Lucchini had 5 total points in 40 games for the Minnesota Wild. Beyond that, you had guys like Adam Raska got 5 games. no points. Sammy Walker played in 4 games, no points. That bottom line, honestly, one of the most productive players on it was Mason Shaw, who had 3 points in 20 games. But beyond that, it was a black hole for any sort of contributions for this Minnesota Wild team. And so if Trenin can come in and even just hit his baseline numbers of 12 goals and 24 points, if he can get to that, I would say, considering what we've seen from this fourth line over the years, I would consider that a success. And if he can help stabilize this penalty kill, and for the Wilds, I don't know, unless the goaltending takes a big leap back in the right direction, I don't know how realistic it is for them to go from third worst to top 10 from a penalty kill perspective, unless scheme changes and major personnel changes. So I would say it's more likely that the penalty kill goes from third worst to like 15th, somewhere in that range, somewhere in the 10 to 15 range, which I think is a big step forward. But this is the exact reason that Yakov Trenin was brought in, was to provide some ferocity and to assist on the penalty kill. He's being brought in as a message to the guys that are supposed to be doing that for their jobs, that their jobs should be in danger. And so I guess the success for Trenin would be if he comes in and proves Bill Guerin right. If he comes in and proves that he can do it better than the guys Billy brought in first, but then the question shifts to, what do you do about those guys? Because now you've got Trenin locked in for 4. What do you do about those guys if you can go find somebody to do it better than they did off the free agent list? I hope you're catching what I'm throwing down here, is I'm insinuating that this hopefully leads Billy in the direction of, hey, I can just go get those guys. I don't have to necessarily lock them in as part of the group going forward. So hopefully this is the one that gets the, okay, maybe I don't need to keep these guys as core pieces. I can go find this if I need it. Let's go get some more scoring. And so to put a neat little bow on the Yakov Trenin season preview, you're going to get a guy that can come in and play tough on the fourth line and help out on the penalty kill. And so it's probably not going to be much more than that. But if he is asked to do more than that, then we're in the same position that we were in last year, where the team just has a ton of injuries and you're asking guys to play out of position to fill spots in the lineup. So the hope then is that Trenin plays bottom 6. I don't care if he bumps up to third line occasionally. That doesn't bother me. But bottom 6 primarily, physicality, defense, and some special teams. That's what you're getting with Trenin. And maybe if he proves that he can do it better than some of the guys that were here first, maybe that'll lead to those guys being shown the door. Time will tell, but that'll do it for today's episode of Locked On Wilds. Once again, we thank you for making Locked On Wilds your first listen each and every day. Make sure to hit that like button on YouTube. We thank you for tuning in, and subscribe so you don't miss out on any new episodes throughout the week. We have new episodes for you every Monday through Friday as part of the Locked On Podcast Network.